Hey, what's up everybody? Let me adjust this camera here. Welcome back. We are in part 3 of our making cutting boards video and live stream. We're still going to use the thickness planer to get the final dimensions of the thickness of the board. There will be some light sanding because 9 times out of 10 these little lunchbox planers, they provide snipe, and I'll show you what that snipe is, and I'm going to show you 2 different methods to prevent the twisting or the board being a little warped, and to get it flat so that when you set it down on a tabletop it doesn't ping pong back and forward. Just real quick before we really hammer into it, I've already done that with 2 boards, and I did that just to kind of speed this video up a little bit. You will need, for one method, you'll need a flat board and you'll need a decent glue gun, and this is essentially what you're going to try to do with that. You're going to have a longer board and you're going to put your cutting board hot glued, just little dabs in the corner here, so we can get the light to hit it right. You kind of see it there and right here, just dabs in the corner. You don't need any type of a massive amount, trust me, because when you try to take this off, it's not going to be fun if you put a huge amount on. Sometimes it's not too fun even with the small amount on. So I'm going to put this glue gun away because I'm not going to need that again. Get that out of the way. And then also, come finishing time, when it's time to apply your finish, if you're going to use mineral oil and butcher block conditioner maybe, you want to have just some clean water, right? Just some clean water and a sponge, and you're going to want to just go over the top of your board, and all that does is it helps raise the grain. So when you sand it for the final time, the grains are raised, and then when you do your finish, they don't raise again on you, so you get a nice smooth finished board instead of a little bit of a roughness to the top of the board. This is one of the boards that I already did earlier, and this black stuff is just some epoxy resin for the bottom side of the board. There was still a couple of gaps, and I knew that those gaps were going to be there. I didn't want to make the board any thinner than it was, so a little bit of epoxy resin to fill that in, and I don't know that this is going to be dry in time for me to run that through the planer again, but the other side of it, nice and smooth. I've already cleared out the snipe, which I'll show you. It'll happen almost for sure. Welcome, viewer. The snipe, I can almost guarantee you will happen on the other 2 boards, and I'll show that to you as it does happen. But for now, let's go ahead and get started here. Set the water aside, we don't need that for right now. So we'll start with the first method, where you hot glue your cutting board to a board. It hangs on pretty good. What you want to make sure is that when you're doing this, you keep running it through in the same direction. We got 2 viewers now. Let me get this angled better for you guys. Get it off of my ugly mug. Well, that's better. Alright, so what you want to do is you want to get your planer adjusted, and you want to make sure that you keep feeding this through in the same direction. You don't want to push it through and then flip it around and push it through again, because you're going to end up with bad results doing that. So you can see all that glue and all that mess. Remember from the last video I said it's easier to clean it off when it's wet. Well, this was the bottom side of the board that didn't get completely cleaned. And you want to make very, very light passes. So I'm doing this and I'm making basically a 1/64 of an inch pass every time I go through. It's going to take off very, very little, but that's going to help eliminate my snipe, and it's going to make my life a little bit easier when it comes time to finish the board. I'm not going to wear my respirator because I'm not going to have fine dust particles, but I am going to run the shop vac, which is loud, and this is loud, so if you have your volume cranked up right now, now is a pretty good time to go ahead and turn it down. trying to do is we're going to keep on trying. You can kind of see that snipe line right there. That is the snipe. That little line right there, it gives you a little raised bump. You have to sand that out. So what we're trying to do is we're going to keep on running until we get rid of all these little imperfections and the whole top of the board is smooth. So this still needs a few more shots through, but alright, so here we go. We got a nice even flat board on the top, and that's a little bit of snipe that I was talking about. But you don't want that. You can feel it if you touch it, and it's usually on both sides. Okay, so you got to get rid of that, and we'll get rid of that with the we'll get rid of that with some 60 grit sandpaper on a palm sander, not an orbital sander. We want just a regular palm sander because it stays flat, and you're going to go against the grain. Normally I would not tell you to go against the grain. I tell you to go with the grain when sanding, but it's just easier to see that line disappear, and when that line disappears, you know you've got enough sanded away from there. So I'm going to go ahead and start the second method, which again is just taking the board and setting it in there and letting it rip. But you got to try to find your flattest side of the board. And I know that this is going to be my bottom side because I got a big nasty crack in this right here that I don't want. So that will actually probably get a little bit of epoxy, but we're going to start with this being the bottom, and I'll flatten this side first, and then we'll flip it over and we'll surface the top side better. And we'll get ready for some noise. Okay, so now we got that side done, and you can still see there's some snipe in there. We're going to have to get rid of that. Okay, so but now that side is pretty flat. We're going to go ahead and break this away from the board. And all we're going to do for breaking that away from the board is going to use your regular little razor knife and just kind of cut right along the bottom. You're not too worried about this board. Okay, we got that one open. Don't be afraid to make a few passes. It's not pertinent that you get through it in one pass. And once you get one side up, that'll pop up, and then you can just fold it over, and the other side will pop right off. And then while you've got it open, just take a regular putty knife, go away from your body and away from your hands, because these things do like to slip. They break free. Try to give you a little better view. Just scrape that glue off of there so it's ready for your next board, if you're going to use that method. Make sure you get both sides. Just kind of have yourself set up for the next board. And if this gets too marred up and too busted and too uneven, you just run it right through your planer and clean it all up. Get it ready for the next go. Okay, so put that one away. We're not going to need that again. At least we shouldn't. Now we're going to do some quick sanding on both of these to get rid of the snipe on both sides. This glue that's here from this edge, a little bit of glue. Just quick razor cut away. It's not too important to get it all, because we already know we're going to run it through the planer and we're going to dimension this down to its final size. So we have to square up this edge anyways. We're going to cut off a bunch of that anyhow. But looks pretty nice so far, right? Alright, so I'm going to grab my mask because the palm sander does kick up a lot of fine dust. So again, we're going to use a palm sander. This does not oscillate. It's just a regular palm sander with 60 grit paper on it. We're going to go against the grain. So what I'm trying to do, I'm making light passes, and I'm only going until I see that little line disappear. If I was using wood that was already really long and I could just cut it off, I wouldn't even bother with this step. I would just cut it off. But since we're using wood that is already shortened, you want to try to preserve as much as possible. And that's what we're doing. Alright, so I'll switch to the other one. I feel like I got the snipe out of that one. You can't really see the line that runs through there, but the board is very dusty. That's okay. Let's go ahead and we'll get the snipe out of this one. Alright, so there are a couple of different methods for filling in these cracks. One method is the epoxy that I showed you earlier, but also if you have sawdust that matches your project, which I have some black walnut, which is pretty close to what this is. This is sapele, but walnut sawdust will work. You can also use just a little bit of glue and some of your sawdust. Since that crack runs kind of deep, all I want to do is just kind of dab a little bit of glue in there. Enough to where it kind of fills in the gap. The gaps in the cracks. The only problem with doing this is that you never really get a great match. But since I already know that this is going to be the bottom of the board, I'm not really too concerned about getting a great match. Just take a couple pinches of your sawdust. And work it in there. And you can just get your sawdust right out of your sander. If you have a, like on my orbital sander, I have a little filter that catches all this sawdust. You can use that just fine. Really all you're doing now is you're just kind of moving this around. You're going to let this dry. This will dry and be a little bit more workable than the epoxy will be. Relatively quick. Epoxy takes a little bit longer. If you don't mind and you got the time to wait, use the epoxy. It's, in my opinion, it's a little bit better. It fills in better. You can make it whatever color you want with different pigments if you want to add that little bit of look to it. It basically just makes like a little paste. Just kind of use your finger to go around it there. That will get sanded out. I still got a little bit of a gap that I don't like. So this can get sanded or planed out. Like I said, I still have a little bit of a gap here, so I'm just going to give a little dab more and repeat that process. Really trying to go back and forward and work it into the groove there. And this is where the epoxy is quite a bit faster. So like I said, if you can use the epoxy, use it. I still have a little bit of a gap, but I can run that through the planer again and knock that down, so I'm not going to be too concerned about it. Just wanted to show you one way that you can fill in those gaps a little bit. Sawdust and my glue back, and we'll get back at this. We'll let this set over here and dry, and we'll do the other side of the other one first. Like I said, so now that we got that side nice and flat, we don't need the board anymore that we put on. We can kind of depend on this to be flat enough. Get ourselves adjusted down. Right around to about a 64th of an inch. Put my hearing protection on. You guys go ahead and turn down your volume. I'm going to attempt to clean up this little bit of epoxy that's on here. It may be premature. I may end up causing myself a little bit more extra work. We'll see. But I'm impatient. And that's not good for cutting boards, to be impatient, but if it works on this, hopefully it works on the other one, and we can move on with all 4 boards. On this, because I just barely want to scratch the surface, I'm going to take very short passes until I just start scraping that epoxy off. Alright, so that took that epoxy off nice and clean and good. That's what we wanted. We'll let that be able to dry. Same thing on this one, right? It cleaned off that whole board real nice. Essentially, we are done with this machine. I'm just going to a little bit of turn off my volume there. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more sanding just like I did on the other ones, and we're going to get rid of the snipe on everything. And then we're going to switch over from the palm sander to the orbital sander, and I'll give it a quick 120 grit sanding, kind of get it to the quote-unquote finished amount. You don't want to be breathing in all that dust. Okay, so we got that part done with the 40 grit. I'm going to take a couple minutes here. I'm going to get the planer out of the way because we don't need that. Take my dust mask off even though it's still quite a bit dusty. And get this all cleaned up and out of the way. Moved aside so that we can proceed to the next portion. And I'm going to actually do a quick cleaning up here of this planer. I don't like to put my tools away dirty. I like to have them ready to go for the next time I use them. Besides that, the next tool that I'm bringing out is going to make quite a bit of a mess. I might as well get some of it cleaned up now. Well, everything is easy to access. No worries, I had the saw unplugged, or the planer unplugged, so I was not in any danger when I was putting my hands in there to get the little bits of sawdust and chips out of there with the vacuum cleaner. It was already unplugged and powered off, made sure of that. Well, this is a relatively expensive tool if you're just starting out. It is relatively expensive, but they are worth the money. I mean, they do a lot of work for you. They make your life a lot easier. So it is one of the tools that I do recommend having. If not that, at least a drum sander. But drum sanders are even more expensive than lunchbox planers. Let's take a quick drink here. We're going to get set up to do the final dimensioning size-wise. This is something I could do on my miter saw, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it with the crosscut sled because most of these boards will fit, except for that one. So that one's going to cause me a little bit of an issue. Oh well, it is what it is. All we want to do is get lined up here. I have to move my stop. Stop on the other side here, just so it's out of my way. What you want to do is just find your best and most squared side, which this side looks like it's it. And crank your blade up. Get it to where these teeth are just barely coming up, just enough to throw those chips out of there. Alright. Put on my earmuffs here. All we want to do is trim both sides, and when I do this, since I'm squared against this side right here, after I cut this edge, flip it over, Just like that, and leave the same squared edge up against it and cut again. I don't want to take off too much. I'm just going to set this to where I'm only going to take about a blade width. Now that side is nice and clean the way we want it. Flip it over, we do the same thing with this side. And that's about how good that glue holds together. Pretty good. Alright, got that side dimensioned. Now I could take off just a little bit more so that I could clean up my edges here. But if I measure and it's the same distance across, then I'm pretty good. It is pretty darn close. I'm calling it good enough, and that's part of the reason why when we did the joining, I cleaned up these edges as well. So that board is ready to get an edge work on it. And we'll go with the thicker one first. Now if you're ever curious how square you're cutting, nice little square. Like I said, I trust my crosscut sled pretty thoroughly. I do not have much of any kind of play in there from either side. Can't really see any light through there. You know you're cutting pretty good and square. And that's also the importance of going ahead and doing the the joining, however you want to say it. That's the importance of doing that while you're in there as well. This one's slightly thicker. So, on one of these edges, it wasn't super clean and good, but I just cleaned up both of those edges. So now if I want, and I probably will, I'm going to just go ahead and clean up this edge a little bit. I want to see how far off I am. I'm not even going to clean it up. And the whole reason I'm not going to clean it up is we're still going to put an edge on this. Once the edge goes on it, you'll never even see that that was even there. And the table saw is kicking up quite a bit of dust too, so I'm going to go ahead and throw my dust mask back on. Alright, so we got all four edges of the boards are good and cleaned up. Everything is squared and good. Dump some of the sawdust out. Bring my little tabletop back up here. That's what I like to use for keeping the tabletop, the saw okay while I'm still doing other work. And now I'm going to use our router. And I know many of you don't have a router table. It's okay. You can use bits like these that give you the same result as a router table, without the router table. And what I like to do is I like to make sure that there's access to grab from the bottom. So I like to use just a 45-degree chamfered bit, and I'll run that along there. And then on the top, we'll go with a, let's go with a 3/8 round over bit on all these. All these boards are pretty big. If I feel like I need to switch it up, we'll switch it up. I'm going to reach down here and I'm going to grab my little trim router. I really like Bosch tools. They've never steered me wrong in any kind of way, so it's really easy for me to like it. And we're going to start with that chamfer bit. We'll do all the bottoms first, and then we'll go and do all the tops. I'm going to set my router to where it's at 0. At least I can get kind of close to where I know where it's at. Setting it at 0. Kind of tighten this in. Okay, so if you have a router table, or even if you don't have a router table, these bits with this little bearing on there, okay, what they allow this bit to do is only go into the wood up to that bearing, and then the bearing does all the work for you. So as long as you got a good side, as this bit spins, it holds up against that wood and it keeps it the same all the way around. Go ahead and plug this tool in. And figure out which side is top and which side is bottom on this. And really, you're just kind of looking at the wood grain and seeing which one is prettier, where you have less imperfections, and where you have a better seam and a better joint. I kind of like this, so we're gonna do a little test and see here. I take this up to maybe 1/4 of an inch and see how far that goes down. That's my thinnest board. I'm going to take it up to, give it about 1/2 inch. Give it a nice deep shadow line, and it's also going to provide a little finger grip hole area to be able to pick the board up. I'm just kind of looking at where I'm at here. What I don't want to do is I don't want to get so deep that I'm carving into it, but I definitely want to have a little room to play with here. I think we're going to be good there. So we'll go back to the mask. And we're also going to go with eye protection because the router throws chips. The routers definitely throw chips quite a bit. And the thickness of the boards being a little bit different, that doesn't matter to me. I'm going to get the same finger tuck grip underneath. And when you're routing, do not end on the end grain, which means this is your end grain side here. When you're doing your routing, if you make your end grain the last thing that you do, you can get chip and tear out on the corner. So if you do these sides, if you do your end grain first, then do your sides, you get a lot better results with a lot less tear out pinging out of the sides. So you get a nice corner there, all the way around. And when the board is set down, you have something to kind of get your fingers underneath to pick it up. So you're going to get some burns. You have to sand the burns out. Burning is kind of inevitable, even with a nice newer bit. It happens. Alright, so that gets us to where we're going to start routing on the tops now. Got all the bottoms done. Now we're easily able to decide which side is top, which side is bottom. Like I said, the little finger grooves on the bottom, if you want, you can add rubber feet to them. It helps raise them up a little bit. And as long as you got a good flat board, the rubber feet is a easy thing. It's not necessarily something super difficult. Go over here and unplug this router so I can change this bit. This particular router, when it's not plugged in, there's no light. And since there's no light, I know it's not plugged in. I'm safe to go ahead and remove my bit. The bit's going to be a little bit warm. So I just want to kick that out of there as quick as possible. I'm going to go ahead and set this back on my 0 mark. Excuse me. Get this set back pretty close to where it's at 0. Excuse me. Sawdust is definitely part of every workshop, but it will cause you to cough and dry out your throat pretty quickly. Especially when you're running a router like this, it's everything gets real dusty real fast. Probably couldn't even see it, but it did blow some stuff off, huh? I'm going to start on my thinnest board again. The reason why I'm going to start on the thinnest board is basically just because if I know that it's not too deep on the thinnest board, I'm not too deep on the thickest boards. Should take us about right. Now, if you're not really familiar with your router or router bits in general, it's a good idea to run a piece on some practice. So if I wanted to just kind of get an idea of how deep it was going to be, I could take a piece of scrap wood, just like this, put my gear on, that was just a little piece of cedar. You can kind of see the round on that. That'll be more than enough for the cutting board. It won't be too deep. Put my ear protection back on, and we'll rip through all 4 of these boards. Again, start on your end grain. like I said, nice round over, all the way down. Adds a nice classy look. You're going to get a little bit of burning. Just sand that out. But this one is ready to catch its final sanding, or second to final sanding. Now, some woods router a lot nicer and a lot cleaner than other woods. End grain almost never routers nice, so there's always going to be some sanding involved with that. But overall, routers are made to run very fast across your piece of work. There we go. Another nice one. Get that last one done. Alright. So, now, just clean up this dust real quick, all these chips. Just that little bit is enough. We're done with the router and the router bits. We'll put these away real quick. Put away the router and router bits real quick. We're going to get some sanding done. Get these things prepped for a good finish. Thought I was missing a bit there for a second. I have a few different router bits in here that I use for more engraving and carving than anything else. Some very fine and small bits. The rest of my router bits stay in their prospective home. The other little router bit case. That tool is good to go. Get that one away. Close that up. Put my router bits back. Put those out of my way. All right. Now, as I said earlier, you want to raise your grain before you do that final sanding. Really, just take a sponge, get it damp. Doesn't have to be anything spectacular. Just kind of wet your board down. Get it wet on all sides. You are going to sand all sides. Typically water is very bad for wood. Don't do it. Don't water your board. But you need to raise your grain. Get a good finish. The bottom side is not as important as the top side. And once you wet it, just set it down standing up on its edge a little bit. Because as it dries, that's all the water that the grain is going to raise is as it dries. Kind of neat part about this is when you put the water on it, it sort of gives you a little bit of a preview of what you're going to be looking at as a finished product. Like I said, it doesn't have to be soaking wet. You don't want it so wet that it's waterlogging your board, but you do want it wet enough to raise the grain. It's really just a damp sponge, but if you flung it, it wouldn't sling water everywhere. We're going to give it just a few minutes to dry each board. Like I said, as it dries, that's how the grain comes up. So this is just a very rough preview too of what it will kind of look like when you get your board wet. And it'll also let you know if you took care of that snipe real good or not, because you can see it in the reflection on the board. It looks like I got that pretty good. I don't have to worry about it. I just re-dampen the sponge after each board. I do the top of the board first, because that's the side I care the most about. And everything else goes towards the sides and the back. Now if I had a cast iron tabletop, I would not be doing this over that. I would definitely stay the heck away from my cast iron tabletop, but this is an inexpensive saw that I am going to be looking to replace soon. And the tabletop on it is not cast iron, so I don't have to worry about water or moisture rusting out that top. And from here, it's just quite a bit of sanding. Like I said, we give these a few minutes and let them dry. In the meantime, I can clean up a little bit, but if I do that, I'm just going to get sawdust everywhere again from sanding. And on this one, we're not going to use the palm sander, we are going to use the orbital sander. And we're going to use a 120 grit sandpaper. Now the orbital sandpaper does a lot of work for you at once, because this pad rotates circularly and it ping pongs kind of back and forward, so it really helps eliminate any type of sanding marks in your wood. So whenever you hear people say sand with the grain, they're trying to eliminate that the sandpaper making its mark in the grain. This does all that for you, makes very small little swirls in there, and it really helps with keeping it clean. So this is almost dry. And we're going to sand it up in just a minute. I'll start with my edges, because those end grain dries up real fast. You can maybe see it in the light like that right there. This is still wet, but the end grain dries up really, really fast. So I'll start with sanding the end grain on this, and we'll work our way around to other stuff. I'm going to go ahead and throw on my dust mask. Even though this sander has a filter that's supposed to help, it still gets everywhere. Now, short of any finish being applied, that one's ready to be have any finish unless we do any customizing work to it. My wife is keeping one of these, so she may want some type of customizing on it. But there you go. That's one done. Just needs to apply some finish, and it'll be good to go. Start with the second one. Number 2. Number 3. Get number 4 done. Welcome, viewer. This is number 4. Now we take off the fan. A little bit of burn right there. The idea is to get rid of all the little burns and scores and smooth all that out right now. You can see this has got a lot of burning on it. It happens. for sticking around, viewer. This is number 4. All finished up, all cleaned up. Got all the edges on it. We got a chamfered edge on the bottom side to give you a little bit of finger grip to get underneath it. And we got rounded over on the top side just because it looks nice and classy as a classical cutting board. So there's fronts and backs. That's number 1. There's number 2. And I don't think you were around. Maybe you were. Maybe you popped in and out a couple of times, but you get them all wet with a sponge just to get the grain raised. And then you do your final sanding, which you were just seeing me do on that last one. These will all get dusted and blown off and thoroughly taken care of, but there's another one. It's the bottom side, top side. And this is why it's just better to do these in batches, because you got to set everything up anyways. You might as well do a few. That was almost bad. Got to set them all up anyways. You might as well do a few. Hopefully I didn't ding that. It would really suck. I have to go back and fix that after I did all that work. I think we're good though. There's that one. Now, all of these are at least 11 3/4 inches wide. This one is about 12 3/8 wide, and 15 5/8 long. This one is 11 3/4 wide by 14 long. (11 7/8) or 15 16ths, I mean, by 14 7/16. 12 by 13 13/16. So they're all varying sizes, and they're all plucked out of different cut-off pieces. So it's just kind of a, your cut-off pieces don't have to go to waste. You can still make something cool and something beautiful. These cutting boards start in the $80 to $100 mark, because there's a lot of work that goes into it. This live stream's been running for 2 hours. I previously had about 5 hours, I think, in my previous 2 live streams. So 7 hours roughly to get 4 boards to this amount of time, not including having to wait for glue. And we'll probably have about another hour or so in applying finish. I am going to put each of these into my laser and put my logo into them. And after that, I will finish them. So for now, unless you have any questions while I'm here and I'm available, make sure I got my chat on. If you have any questions while I'm here and available, go ahead and ask them now. Otherwise, I'm going to get ready to shut this down and get ready to put my logos in there. Alright, I'm going to step away and go dump out this water real quick, give you time to type anything you want to type, and then I'll be back. Alright, well, thanks for watching, everybody.